Welcome to a new Music for series. Again, we are here in a very exciting moment, and I would say very special series that we are leveraging in terms of reflecting the music in life, the music in the planet, the music in our lives, in our spiritualities. And I'm here with my partner in crime here, Amrita Sen, trying to bring people that actually can actually help us defining how we can actually make a better feeling of being part of this wellness and being part of the music of humanity, but as well looking at how we can actually look at these very big topics of humanity that touches us all, but as well that can bring a bit more of harmony to us. So Amrita is quite well known as an author, musician for the people who listen to us. And today we have a special guest. There's Suvarna Jha Sira. She's a former actor, like she said, but she was a very famous actor in Bollywood. And she's as well a fantastic researcher that has been doing research in a lot of topics. And today we're going to be talking about music for Buddha and the topic of Buddha that is part of a book of Amrita. I want to just start with a quote precisely about Buddhist practice. Before we go, that is, most Buddhist practice involves chant in some form, and some also make use of instrumental music and even dance. Music can act as an offering to the Buddha, as a means of mesmerizing Buddhist texts, and as a form of personal cultivation or meditation. I think this summarizes a bit of this series. Of course, we're not Buddhists, or I'm not, but of course, I respect a lot. But we are more here in the sense of respecting tradition, talking about history, talking about what makes us humans and makes us special. And I'll pass the word to my co-host, Amrita Sen, that is as well a very special artist and musician herself.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Dinis, and I'm so excited to have Suvarna. What I'm going to do today is really provide context for why we're talking about Buddha, how I got involved in this Buddha conversation, and then I'm going to ask my friend Suvarna a heck of a lot of questions so she can tell the audience how much she knows about this very old topic. I was fascinated by the idea of Buddha because starting 3 years ago, I was listening and reading about so much effort being put into mindfulness as a topic, social media, and just different books that I would see in stores about the concept of controlling your mind, controlling your thoughts, understanding your breath, and just the sheer cacophony of information about this one topic. And then, of course, I like to peel the onion to see why things are so popular, in our time. And I thought, okay, well, it can't be an original idea. Where did it start? Well, it's the obvious answer is that Buddha was one of the more popular back in the day. He was one of the more popular advocates of the concept of mindfulness. So popular, in fact, that he started a religion in the midst of early Hindu India, 600 BC, and it not only became a movement in North India, but over time it spread, as we all know, Southeast Asia, China, even certain parts of the Middle East. So this idea of mindfulness was very much in that part of the world for a very long time and continues today. One of the ideas I had was to take the Buddha concept, the religion, the mythology, and say, okay, well, what would it have been like, not only musically, not only from a narrative standpoint, but what would it have been like from the point of view of his wife? Because the mythology is that he decided to leave, even though he was a very rich prince and his father had expected him to become, a dynastic ruler. He decides to leave one night and say goodbye to his wife and his kid, and then he's gone for 7 years. Okay, so that's the myth. Now, I wrote a book around that myth just to be able to highlight the topic in and of itself. And we can obviously talk about the book. I encourage you to listen to it, read it. But then I thought, okay, let's reconstruct what might have happened. Okay, I can't think of anybody better in my life to reconstruct what could have possibly happened, particularly from a female point of view, than my friend Suvarna. So in introducing Suvarna, who I met over a series of dinners in London, I thought, okay, this is probably a person who knows a lot about a lot of things. And she probably has a point of view on what Yashodhara, the wife of Buddha, what her life was like. Okay, so Suvarna, in introducing you, I'm going to paint the picture and I'm going to ask you one question. Buddha is son of a king. The Brahmins are very powerful. There's a lot of talk about, asceticism in general in that society. It might have been quite fascinating to become an ascetic at that time, right? You have the opportunity now to raise your kid. One day you decide, you know what? I'm just going to go off into the forest. I'm not going to eat for days. What was she thinking? Or was she part of it or not? And how does that feel?
Hi, Amrita and Dinis. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to jump right in and say that we're both Yashodhara and Siddharth Gautam were the daughter and son of these powerful kings. And, they were cousins and they were married to each other at a young age, about 15, 16. When Siddharth Gautam was born into this great clan of the Gautams, his father called for a bunch of oracles and seers and sages who all prophesied that this child would grow up to be either a great conqueror or a great sage. There was no middle ground. And the father himself, having these aspirations of conquering greater lands, of course, wanted his son to carry on his dynasty and rule in his stead after his passing. And so he surrounded his son with all the luxuries and pleasures, earthly flesh pleasures, never allowed him to experience any kind of pain or discomfort or suffering. When he got married at that very young age to Yashodhara, it is said that Suddhodan, the father of Siddharth Gautam, warned her and said that this has been prophesied for my son. And he may in a few years leave and go into the forests and leave you and any children you have behind. And so she entered into this contract of marriage willingly with her eyes open and expected probably, over the course of the years that she was married to this man, that any day he would up and leave. And then, of course, when he was exposed to the sufferings of the world, pain and old age and death, and he had this revelation that life was not all pleasure, and he had within him the need to go out and discover the truth of all of the suffering, it is said that she actually supported him in his desire to learn the truth and sent him on his way willingly after she'd had her son, Rahul. As I was saying earlier, there's two schools of thought. Either she was completely unaware and he left without telling her, left without saying a word, and essentially deserted his son and wife and went off into the forest for how many years. Or she was a willing participant and she said, I support you in your search for truth. And I will hold stead here in your place. You go out and do what you have to. I tend to believe the latter because this is the daughter of a powerful king. He is the son of a powerful king. If either of them had wanted, they could have brought him back or have him brought back from the forest or wherever he was. It is also said that Yashodhara actually was pivotal in controlling the anger of her father-in-law at the discovery that his son had left. And she was the one who explained to him and convinced him that this was the right way, a right thing for Siddharth to do.
Okay, so if you're arguing that she was in on it, okay, so she was in on this idea that they were both sort of co-conspirators in creating. Let's think about what the idea was, what likely propagated the idea, and some modern examples of it. So the idea is want to change things from the way they currently are. That's the big idea. You don't love the inequality of the society. You're not necessarily bought into the Hindu caste system. Okay, number one. Number two is there is still a very powerful asceticism concept at this point in the society. The Brahmin culture had already infiltrated. There was a caste system. They believed in asceticism as a tool for social and political motivation of people, as a way of controlling and advancing society. So we know that. So to what extent was this idea of becoming an ascetic to advance political thought, social thought, even an original idea? Can you argue that the husband and the wife got together and just tried to create a better mousetrap of what was already going on? And I'll ask a third question, I guess, wouldn't you say that a lot of political families like Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, they formed the idea together, and one was going to be the one, quote unquote, left behind or in the shadows, and the other one was going to be the main face of the idea? So I think I asked 3 questions.
I'll try and remember the 3 that you asked. But,
Okay.
I don't know how much of a political decision it was. I doubt it was, really. One has to understand that in this time in history in India, in that Indic valley, ascetics weren't considered outside of society. They were people that willingly stepped out of society, pursued their search for truth and wisdom.
But they were respected popular beings. They
were.
weren't necessarily revolutionaries, is what I want to say. They were very much part of the conversation.
You're absolutely right. They were. One has to understand that in those days, one did have the cinema or the museum or an art gallery to go to, on an evening and get some entertainment. These wandering ascetics and sages and searchers of truth were very much part of the fabric of society. So when they'd have these great discussions, when 2 sages or two hermits or ascetics would get together and debate the concept of reality and sansar and suffering and truth, the lay people around from the villages would come together and sit and witness this great debate between these 2 learned beings, and try and absorb what wisdom they could and actually get great entertainment out of it as well. So they were very much the fabric of society. They weren't just on the outskirts.
So some of them might have been rock stars. Some of them might have been their own form of authors, orators, poets. They were not necessarily people that lived on the fringes. They were the entertainers of the society. So wouldn't it be, think about this for a second. What if the son of the king, the prince Siddhartha Gautama, said, I think there's something here to this. I think this may be a way to really become the next king. I'm just throwing this out. And maybe he went to his wife and said, what do you think? Maybe we could do this better. We're more resourced. We have better connections. We have this amazing view of the land. We know where to go. What do you think if we did this together? How likely would that have been at the time?
I think extremely unlikely, because now we're looking at this, or you're looking at this from a very modern perspective,
Yes.
which is necessarily cynical. These are the times we live in, right? I think had he had political ambitions, it would have simply been easier to stay in his palace and be a king and conquer great, more land and more territory, like the oracles foresaw for him. This was certainly in the more difficult path. There was no guarantee of success. He was a searcher of truth. Would he ever find it? He was leaving all his luxuries behind, every privilege, every security, to go on this very difficult journey, where there was no guarantee that he would ever find what he was looking for. Was there any power in it? No, because he gave up any power, all power. Any power that he got was not power that he sought or aimed for or aspired to. That was power that was given to him by the people, and not the kind of power, not kingly power. It was the power of his thought, of his thoughts and of the truth that he had found that people aspired to. So it was it's wrong to say that was power that he held over people, even after he became the enlightened one, became Buddha, you know. I don't know how much of a conspiracy it would have been between the husband and wife to say, you know what, let's go out and do this.
Yeah. Well,
That's a
clearly he felt something was very wrong, right? Something motivates someone
Yeah.
to leave all that. So clearly something was wrong. And when you think about just the sheer poverty that has always been a reality of life for the Indus Valley and for that whole region, which we now know to be India today, just the sheer acceptance of poverty had to have bothered people at the time, right?
Well, historically, the Indus Valley, that Indic civilization, north to south, was historically extremely wealthy, wealthier than all the other parts of the world. Poverty was almost unknown for a very long time. Poverty, the way we understand it today, poverty that certainly exists in India now, was almost non-existent back then. People were educated. At the very least, you got food to eat, even if you had nothing else, because people believed in alms and taking care of their people. A wandering mendicant could get a bowl of food from any household that he went and knocked on the doors of. However, for this boy who had been shut out from all the realities of life, pain is a reality of life, suffering is a reality of life, getting old and dying is a reality of life. But his father had shielded him from all those truths. So here is this young prince growing up wearing these silks and, you know, and having these dancing girls performing for him all the time, married to this gorgeous woman, eating the best foods. Decides when he's older, and he tells his father, he says, I've never stepped foot outside the palace. I'd like to go and see what happens outside. And the father thinks about it. He's dreading this day. And he says, fine, one day next week or whenever, we'll make sure that you go out. And so this boy sets out in his chariot with his charioteer and goes through the streets of the city, not knowing that the father had everything cleared out, had all signs of poverty or old age or disease, everything cleared out, so that this boy is faced with only this pristine image of the world outside. And despite the father's best efforts, Suddhodhan's best efforts, Siddhartha Gautam encounters this man who's not well. He's in pain, so he encounters pain for the first time. And then he goes further and he sees this really old man, and he's never seen old age like that, where they're decrepit, almost falling over, they've no teeth in the mouth. He's never seen that before. And then he comes across this body being taken for cremation, and he's never seen death before. And he comes back and he asks his charioteer, he says, what is this? And the charioteer tells him the truth, says, this is pain, and this is old age, and this is death, and all three are the reality of life, and we all have to go through it. There's no escape from this reality. And he comes back and his brain is churning. It's full of these questions that he's never had before, because he's never faced these realities before. And at whatever age, he's faced with this harsh truth, and he can't reconcile with himself the reality that he knew all his life and the actual truth of the world that is out there. And it throws him into this frenzy of thought, where he can't he can't bring together the two truths and make them the same. And somewhere, I think the father sowed the seeds of his own destruction, so to speak, by shielding the son as much. When the son was finally faced with reality, it was too much for him to cope with, and he had to find out the truth of why suffering, why do we have to suffer pain and old age and death. And it was the desire to find the truth behind suffering that led him to leave his home and family and step out into the world and give up everything and go looking for the truth.
Suvarna, the story that you've just told us about is so powerful that I just realized as you were talking that there's a movie. It carries on. There's a movie called The Truman Show that reminds me very much of the way you narrated the story. Is you can only protect someone so much, but are they really experiencing life, right? The protection is a natural parental instinct that we all have for our friends, our family, our kids, but you can only do that so much. Now, thinking back on the other side of the coin, somebody who was still in the palace, okay, she all of a sudden, Yashodhara, she has led a fairly nice life as well. She's the daughter of a king and his cousin. Wouldn't you think that this is a massive shock to her and the beginning of her journey of suffering at the same time? Now she has this kid. What does she tell the kid? What does she decide to do next? What are her options at this point? Just to be a nice wife and cook lentils for her in-laws, or how would that work?
Right, Yashodhara's role is not as spoken of. We all know the story of Siddhartha Gautama. He goes into the forest, and for years, he trains under different teachers, but two specific teachers, and becomes an ascetic and starves himself nearly to death. The story of Yashodhara is very interesting because, like I said, she was probably pivotal in the birth of Gautam Buddha. They probably would not have been a Gautam Buddha if Yashodhara had not explicitly given her consent to his leaving. And of course,
why do you think that? Why do you think he needed her consent to be able to do what he did?
Yeah, I don't think it's so much the consent, but certainly the agreement of to be a party and be all right, almost, with his decision to leave. This is not the son of a shopkeeper. This is not the son of some common man. This is a prince and the son of a very powerful king. He can't just get up and leave, right, without repercussions. At the very least, this father who had these great aspirations for him would have sent an army out to go and drag him back home. It is said that his father was very unhappy with the fact that Siddhartha Gautama had got up and left. So Yashodhara was instrumental in calming her father-in-law down and saying, this is what he needs to do. This is the right thing. Bringing him back is not going to make things better because he'll just get up and leave again. Let him have his way. You have your grandson. I'm here. You still have a kingdom to rule. Go ahead and do that. And if your son has to return, he'll come back. However it is that she pacified him, she did so.
She was the keeper. So you're basically saying that Siddhartha left knowing that his wife was probably okay with it. And if he was that attuned to human suffering, he wouldn't have just left knowing that she was adamantly against it. That there was probably some sense of peace and calm that his household was still in order when he left. Would you agree with that?
I do. When you consider the nature of the Buddha, there has been a lot of derision and scorn heaped on him, and they say, he gained his truth at the cost of his family, at the cost of his wife and son. But history doesn't bear witness to that. History bears witness to the fact that his wife and son joined him eventually, so many years later, on his quest for the truth, to become, arhats themselves, seekers of truth. And they joined his movement, so to speak. It wasn't a movement then, but they became his disciples and attained great enlightenment on their own terms. Yashodhara, very interestingly, when you talk about, you have to be a Buddha, you have to go out into the world, renounce everything. Renunciation is the key to enlightenment. And then you have Yashodhara, on the other hand, who still lived in the palace. I always had this question when I was seeking my own spiritual path, which I haven't really found yet, was how do you stay true to your spiritual self and build your spiritual self while still living in the world? It's very difficult. You come back and your senses are bombarded by everything that's around you. How do you stay on that path to discover greater truths? And the truth is, Gautam Buddha went into the world. He attained enlightenment after years and years of trying various practices and discovering his own truth under the Bodhi tree. But then simultaneously, Yashodhara, who had always kept an eye on her husband, where he was, what he was doing, what were the new practices that he was following, and duplicated them herself in the palace. So she famously slept on the floor, slept in a hut, ate one meal a day, gave up all her silks for simple attire. But they say that, she managed to do that, and she stayed on her spiritual path while still being surrounded by all of life's pleasures in a palace. So it's a very interesting parallel to the story of Gautam Buddha, who did all of this while renouncing everything, and the wife who stayed in the palace, living a royal life, raising her son. So essentially staying grounded in the world, in sansar, while still managing to, follow his path.
So you could argue you could argue she was more or less the practical face of it, right? So, I mean, I can't help but put some modern twists to what you're talking about. One idea is asceticism meditation had existed in this society and was quite popular. But I can't help but think that Buddha, with the help of his wife, found a better technology. They did find a better mousetrap of something that was already very much circling the society, which is you meditate and you seek peace in this way. You organize your thoughts in this way. But he alone out there in the suburbs, if you will, I don't think there were suburbs back then, couldn't have had the same reach in talking about this new technology as she did in the palace. She, and I'll flip this back to you, was she a pivotal marketing engine for him because she had access to the city and she had access to dispersing this information about this new discovery to so many more people than he did?
So just one note here, because of course I did a bit of research, and picking in what both of you said, I will just quote the research. Of course, there's always different sources, but the source picking, so she actually, it seems that at the age of 29, when she gave birth to their only child, Rahula, so on the seventh night of his birth, the prince left the palace. So Buddha left the palace 7 nights after the birth of his child. And she was of course, Yashodhara was devastated and overcome with grief, but he told her that he was leaving. So he actually told her, but it seems like, according to this history, and of course this is kind of the sources I saw from Wikipedia and other sources, is that she knew, and she had that life being in the palace, although the family tried to remarry her, tried to do different things, but Buddha never came again until later in their life. So he kind of abandoned his wife and his son, which is kind of very strong as well.
But that is the myth, though, Dinis, right? That is.
I know. I'm reading the kind of official biography that is in multiple places.
Even with the story, it is well known that this beautiful princess had many offers of marriage after Siddhartha Gautam, after her husband left, and she actually refused every single one of those offers. And she had, her family saying it, and her husband's family saying that, we will take care of you in every way. You and your son have nothing to worry about. She was not wanting for material comforts. She was not lacking in offers. If she had chosen to, she could have gotten married to another prince, another king, and, had the life if she so desired. It was very much her own decision, therefore, to remain the wife of this prince who had gone off into the forest. And I don't think, it's very easy to say, oh, this poor woman had no choice and she was abandoned, as though she had no agency over her own life.
She did, in fact, have a lot of agency, and she might have been sort of the other end of the marketing. And marketing is a very, it's a gross term, but she might have been the other end of the exposition machine that he ended up creating for the concept.
Yeah, so he didn't actually create, but it did become a movement after his death. That's a whole different story. However, she and her mother-in-law, who was actually the aunt of Siddhartha Gautam, his mother died right after his birth, and he was brought up by his maternal aunt, Mahaprajapati, who also was a great supporter of his. And so his wife and his mother were great, after he became Gautam Buddha, and 7 years after he'd left the palace, he did return home once, uh, with on the condition, because his father called him back, on the condition that he would not enter the palace grounds, on the condition of this and that or whatever. And however long, so of course, when his wife told him that, my son and I would like to become your followers, we'd like to follow in your footsteps, he said no. And then, of course, she and her mother-in-law, Mahaprajapati, actually took a retinue of, I think it was 500 women who shaved their heads and became bhikkhunis, the female version of the bhikshus, or the bhikkhus, the beggars with literally bhikkhus, who were beggars with bowls, who went around practicing their spiritual path, but they would collect food from whatever households they passed. So they were called bhikkhus. So they became bhikshunis, shaved their heads, and went how many ever hundreds of miles to find the Buddha. And then he had no choice but to accept them. He discussed it with his chief disciple or whoever it was, and they came to the realization that there was no denying these women. You can't deny someone, search for the truth simply because they're women. And so they were accepted into it, and they became the
I do find it fascinating, Suvarna, that here is a group of women who weren't accepted when he came back. And I've always, when I was writing the book, I thought, do I really cover this topic of how she had to kind of earn her way back in, or earn her way into being part of the stream, the movement, or whatever movement there was? And yeah, she made it, she and her mother-in-law made it undeniable, the acceptance. But that kind of is not fair, right? Like you have to, it's not really fair. You number one, lose your husband. Number one, you have to tell your kid, oh, you're 7 years old and you don't have a dad. Oh, and by the way, this very thing I want, I'm not being accepted for it in the first place. So that, to me, seems equivalent, if not even more, than the difficult journey that Buddha put himself on. Talk about Yashodhara being in the belly of the beast and being called upon to be a hero and saying, is this really all worth it? Shouldn't I just marry that other handsome man who looks like The Rock and call it a day? Talk about being put on your own difficult journey, on your own, like your own temptation, if you will, and then coming out the other side.
I'm sure if I read a bit more, I'd find some justification for Siddhartha. By that time, he was the Buddha, refusing his wife and mother, entrance
and son
into his
in a way.
Father to ask for his inheritance. You're my father. What do you have to give me? And this man had already gone off into the forest, found his truth, became the enlightened one. And here comes this young boy and says, I'm your son, give me my inheritance. And so the Buddha thought about it, and he smiled, and he says, I have nothing material to give you, but what I have to give you is worth more all the jewels in all the land, in all the world. And so then he took him on as he taught him what he taught him, and his son Rahul also followed in his footsteps, became a bhikkhu, and had his own spiritual path as well, learning what his father had already learned. So I don't think that he really denied the son. With the wife, I really don't know. One can guess. One can make educated guesses. Perhaps it was just the way things were. Men went out and led this difficult life as ascetics, as hermits, as seekers of truth, and it was too difficult a life for women, so they stay home, they raise the families. I don't know, was it a kind of patriarchy?
Don't you think that our women of history deserve a second chance? Wouldn't you say that is a lost opportunity for not re-looking at history from the point of view of what she went through and what went into her thoughts at the time?
I agree with you 100%. Women are always such a side note, or a footnote in the annals of history to all the great accomplishments. Men built this, men created that, men destroyed that. And they were married to so-and-so, or even more likely, so-and-so bore him such and such son, which is, the only role of a woman has been to bear the heirs of the great man. But I think history was written by men, so the women were sidelined.
Yeah.
It's definitely not true that women had nothing to do with the great achievements in history or whatever. Yes, gaining great land and fighting great battles. Did they have a nagging wife in the back? Did they have a supportive wife in the back? Did she stride out and win her own battles? I imagine it would be such an interesting subject to try
Yeah.
and unearth, dig up.
Well, I do have a theory on why that may be, is that most of military power rested in the hands of men. Women might have had a lot of intellectual power, a lot of spiritual, emotional power, but military power for so much of human history was the dominant form of power, that it doesn't surprise me that these things were written from the standpoint of, oh, the person with the swords or the guns get to write the history. But we are in a revolution now. We're in a revolution where having intellectual power is truly power, being able to organize thoughts and communicate across. Look, you're in London, I'm in LA, Dinis is wherever he is.
In London.
We have our own swords and our own guns that we could either use in a good way or not a good way. But I think one big learning I have in reading the history books I have is that nothing is new. All of these concepts of conflict and of discovering of concepts of better mousetraps, of family, family strife, these have happened before, and they've happened in very profound ways. And I think that I am extremely grateful, Suvarna, that you've spent the time reading about Yashodhara, because I think that there is a lot more to this woman than we think. We could easily spend probably a full 2 seasons of a TV show trying to unwrap and reconstruct her mind. What happened? What was going on inside this poor woman's mind? Not to mention the fact that she was probably very beautiful, probably had everything available to her, yet she chose this extraordinarily difficult path.
Well, the two adjectives most commonly used to describe Yashodhara are beautiful and compassionate. So a woman with beauty, yes, great, wonderful. She's gorgeous. Everyone wants her,
Yeah.
but also compassion. So she came with that one quality, which the Buddha discovered to be the one aspect of humanity that is so important for us to have compassion for all sentient beings, not just for the people around us, but for people we don't know, for living beings that aren't human beings, for all life. And he discovered, and when in Buddhism they speak of compassion being one of the great tools that we have to literally make this world a better place. And here's this woman who has compassion in bounds, so she already had that quality.
Think about this for a second. Think about the fact that they've known each other since they were such young kids.
Yeah.
She's quite possibly the biggest influence he had from a very young age. She was his sibling, and he learned whatever he didn't know from another sibling, he learned from her. It's very possible that they had a tremendous influence on each other since the nascent stages of what you would call Buddhism.
Yeah, I think it's very possible. We all know that, when you have a dog or a husband, after so many years, you end up looking like each other anyway. So it's very possible that they had that deep spiritual influence on each other growing up. When he went out and saw the harsh realities that he did and came back and very probably discussed with his wife, she probably stoked his curiosity, stoked the flames of his curiosity and desire to get to the root of the suffering. What is suffering? Suffering exists.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was any such thing.
They must have talked about it endlessly. They must have spent so many nights. Think about it. They didn't have the baby until she was 29.
Yeah.
So they had a lot of free time to talk about.
A lot of free time, and they were of a similar age. So of course, I mean, they're probably each other's best friends, you'd imagine. I don't imagine this relationship full of strife and oh, he couldn't wait to get away from his wife. They were probably best friends who could and did talk about everything, because think about it this way: who did they have in their age group who were actually their peers? They did. This is the daughter of a king and the son of a king. There was nobody around them of a similar age who had the same experience, except for
Yeah.
the two of them, and they're married to each other. Anyone else either works for you, in the hierarchy of the court.
You know you're a cousin since you were a little boy. You have all this time. You're basically in a household where there's not much to do except for learning how your dad runs the kingdom. You don't have to do any laundry. You don't have to fix light bulbs. So you had a lot of time with your best friend to take walks in the garden.
Well, no, they didn't actually physically grow up together. So they're.
But how old were they when you got married?
Connection. 15, 16, which
Okay.
was a good age at that time.
Think about it. 15, 16, 29 minus 15, 14 years.
In
Yeah.
the beginning of the 20th century, the life expectancy average in the world was around 40 years.
No, so
she went until 78, but yeah, just metrics. Yeah.
Yeah, so at that time, you have to understand, in this civilization, this part of the world, there wasn't great sickness and plagues, right? So Ayurveda was highly developed. They did have access to good medical treatment. So it's not inconceivable that people lived for much longer, and people but historically in those days did live long lives. So for them to have lived till their 78, which was her age when she died, and 80, which was his, when he died of food poisoning, and not of old age, of food poisoning, it wasn't inconceivable in those days for people to live long, healthy lives, because they did. We understand age or long lives today to exist now because we've been through the Middle Ages and everything with disease, especially in the Western world, disease, and of course the influences on the East, not just India, but all of the East, disease and plague and sicknesses and illnesses and all these new modern diseases came into society and killed everyone. You have smoke, clogging up your lungs, everything. So people lived shorter and shorter lives. But back then, I'm presuming when the air was clean, you had access to these great herbs and doctors who were, well-versed in traditional, what we call traditional medicine now, Ayurveda, which have been, cutting-edge science in those days. They did lead long, healthy lives. It was absolutely normal. So
they had a lot of time to spend with each other.
They did, absolutely.
And they were probably very secure in their relationship by the time he left.
True.
Which, Dinis, I would challenge this what I would call a myth that she was shocked and despondent. I think she was.
I agree. Actually, because the point is, you're right, because if she's 29 years old and they are 14 years, and they actually told her that he would do that, so probably it was consensual. I'm sure that she knew, or she kind of even agreed. But yeah, it's great to look
I'll
at
ask another question.
I want to let me provoke one to Suvarna. I kind of disagree about that there was a mythical time of elf, because you have to see that even if okay, from a spiritual perspective, of course, if we go back on time, we always see sometimes there's no pollution, there's no other things, but effectively there were a lot of other things. There was not well,
there was no penicillin.
Yeah, completely. And even if you look at the description of the time, okay, the description of the time is the first time Buddha left the palace. The father took all the homeless and people with problems from the streets to let him pass. So that's why he got shocked, because when they start checking that it was not the life of the palace. So I just want to, of course, I'm not an expert in the time history, but this is kind of global data. Is the average time until the 20th century is 40 years old. The average, okay, I'm not talking because the wife of Buddha went to 78 according to historical records, at least what I read.
Well, Dinis,
yeah, sorry, I just want to provoke on that.
I think to both your points, they probably, within the constraints of the palace, they probably had so much access to Ayurvedic technology that the concept of their own mortality, right, that, oh, I'm going to hit 30 and I'm going to die, was probably not the same as what people outside of the palace grounds were facing. And that might have been one of those things that propagated Buddha living, is why do we get to live longer potentially than somebody else? Why is our life worth more? Because is money actually worth more years, physical years in your lifespan than not having?
I want to address this point of Dinis's by saying, Dinis, there's all these texts, these old Vedic texts from ancient India, addressing the question of longevity in ancient India, where, one of the great texts, I forget which one, says that man's life is divided into 4 quarters. And the first is where, he's a child, he's a young man. And so he lives the life of the single man, so to speak, the student and then the single man. And that's his life as a youth. And then that's the first 25 years of his life. In the second 25, Grihastashram, is where he becomes a married man. And for the next 25 years of his life, he is consumed by worldly affairs, raising his family, making a living, creating his place in the world, making sure that his family is well. In the next 50 years life, in the next 25 years, so that's from 50 to 75, is where he takes a more retired, he steps back and is a bit more retired in life.
Which you would call post-ambition.
Well, I'd call it the retired life. And the last 25 years of the life, that 75 to 100, is when you become hermits and you give up on worldly lives and vanashram. So you go, so to speak, into the forest. You basically become hermits. So life was divided into these quarters. So a century, which was conceivable in those days, a man's life was divided into quarters. So 25 years is one stage of your life, where you're a child and a student and a single man sowing your wild oats. And the next 25 to 50, you're a worldly man raising your family. The next 50 to 75, you're retired. And the next 75 to 100, where you give up on everything and then you go to seek your spiritual enlightenment, and you go into the forest and
you give back. And I think the last 25 years, Suvarna's in this period of asceticism, you give back the learning.
That means forest. So basically, you go into the forest and you become hermits. To say, well, I understand where they say that the global life spans were that short is understandable. Of course, there was sickness and disease. Like you said, penicillin did not need to exist in those days, because penicillin was needed to combat modern disease, which didn't exist back then. Ayurveda as a science was developed to quite a degree. I mean, it's a proven fact that they had cesarean sections, and very successful cesarean sections in ancient India under the practices of Ayurveda. So of course they had, seemingly, and it's been proven historically, that they could actually perform successful surgeries as well. There's been a known case of rhinoplasty. So they actually had plastic surgery on a nose in those days. So we don't know really how advanced they were, how much has been lost to the ages. I don't know. I don't think it's really inconceivable to say that they had longer lives. Maybe not 78, 80, maybe that's a long stretch, who knows. But I do believe that they could, of course, have had, decently longer lives than we think for that age. I think it's quite possible.
Dinis, it seems from this that I don't think that Siddhartha was at 29 when he left the palace, was thinking about mortality. I think he set out to do what he was going to do, thinking at least that he would have quite a few years to figure out whatever he's going to figure out.
No, I'm completely there. That makes complete sense. And as well, bearing in mind, like Suvarna said, that both of them were from exceptional, wealthy and privileged positions, both of them princes, and actually from the family, because she was her cousin, direct cousin. So that means there was an entire, purely from an emotional perspective, not from an historical perspective. If you are with a person for 10, 15 years, of course, you know the person quite significant for good and for bad. So if you make a decision like that, and actually if your partner didn't actually try to get any other engagement and kept a life of kind of somehow a life of very close to her husband, by all means. So that means she knew much more. And even if probably they were not talking, because of course the relationships were not the same as we can consider it now, but every culture has their nuances and every couple has their own as well things. By far, she actually was sharing the values. And even when she sent her son to her father, he became as well a monk and he followed his father's footsteps. So of course the relationship, I think that comes to the story that both of you are telling. But from an emotion and human perspective, this is a very powerful story by all means, because in the end of the day, I think the only story I would say that is similar to this in historical levels is San Francisco of Assis, the Italian as well priest that became as well, they create an order as well. I studied from a Christian perspective all the orders of Christianity, and they're very similar. For instance, San Francisco created an order of extreme, he was from an extreme family, wealthy family, and he left everything to create a very poor order that he actually, at the time, changed the entire face of Europe. And it still exists now, but of course now, but in the first 100 years or 200 years, the Francis order made, it was one of them, it really changed the entire face of Europe. So it's very similar to the Buddhism in the beginning. Of course, in this case, within the Christian religion, in this case of Buddha, was creating an entire religion that actually changed the world, mostly the Asian world, but it had probably a massive impact in the human history. But coming back to your narrative, Amrita, and I think that's the part that is really exciting, is the way you put your book is a provocative, but it's as well very poetic. But in the end of the day, is what makes it any beautiful love story or any kind of historic story, is how you position the emotions of the people within this. And of course, it's interesting. Come back right now to your creative process and the music as well, because you put the music as well, because I would like to probably provoke both of you, because of course, Suvarna, you were a quite famous actress. Even I know that is a person of past life.
I do know one thing. Suvarna denies that she was a famous actress, but we won't agree with her. But she is
well, the Wikipedia page says another thing as well. Well, not
she is
famous
absolutely
to some
the smartest actress I know.
Yeah,
and
that's
I
for
know
sure.
a lot of actors and actresses.
No, but I would like from the creative side, and as well, because I'm a man, and for me, I saw a lot of course, as a gender. Let's talk from the gender perspective, because of course, I think your story, Amrita, is very gender focused in a good way as well. So I would like to hear how do you see that? Of course, one thing is looking at this thousands of years ago, now is looking at now. It's kind of a complexity as well. In one end, there's somehow a love story, because she actually finished her life close to her husband at the end of the day. So actually, it's a love story in a lot of ways.
It's one of the best love stories of all time. It's one of the best love stories. So that's, my process very much in this journey I took 10 years ago was the concept of deconstruction and reconstruction, right? Deconstructing myths that I grew up with and just saying, what value do I have in this world just as a learned person? And all you really have in your life is the ability to ask questions. That's all you really have, So when I thought about some of the most powerful myths that have affected me and my friends and the society I live in, Buddha just became a natural mythology to deconstruct and then potentially explore the idea of reconstructing it from a different point of view. It may be that my point of view never really happened, but I wanted to personally choose a very musical point of view, right? And music and love are intricately linked, like a braided hair, So when you think about putting music to Buddha, how do you do a musical piece about Buddha if you're not talking about the love he has for his wife, So that was very much my creative process.
Suvarna.
No, carry on. I was
No,
just
I wanted to hear you.
Talk about the love that he has for his wife. And he still left her and went away. Couldn't it just have been the great love that he has for his wife and child, and he wants to find the source, find the truth, so that they don't have to go through the suffering that he's seen this.
Or finding a purpose. You know, I often think when I go and travel, right, Suvarna,
Yeah.
you know, I went to London and my mom is very sick. My son is in high school. My husband obviously needs me to cook my horrible food that I do, but I still managed to get on a plane and go. And you ask yourself, why do you leave? You know, because when I do get on that plane, it is very hard to leave my family. But every time I do a business trip, but I do it for many reasons. I do it because you cannot bring good to others if you don't go out and expose yourself to higher learning. And in our modern day, you have to get on planes, you have to get in cars and have meetings and talk to people. And if you talk to people, you learn more and you bring that back to your family. And the fact that I came back from London and I had seen a different world post-pandemic and I was able to share that with my son, I think he's going to appreciate that more than if I stayed home and made my horrible salmon.
True.
But, you know, someone like Buddha at that time, when they got on a plane, they didn't have the technology to come back in 7 days. When they left, they really had to leave. You know, if they wanted to go far away, just the journey back was something. So I just think about it, you know, like these universal thoughts, these universal feelings. I do want to go out there and learn things, expose myself. So my son and my kids and my ecosystem doesn't have to live in such extreme boredom at the end of the day. And look, I went to London, I met you, and here we are.
After years and years of speaking to each other on the phone, we finally
we are, but it's the human connection that made me realize that, oh my God, there's really something special out there. You know, there's a series of special polka dots all out there in the world, and there is no bad. Literally, there's no bad that comes from taking a chance
and putting yourself
going out there and putting yourself out there, even if you're going to get hurt, and bringing it back.
You know, I have to say, and I have to interject at this point and say, just speaking purely from the perspective of the world as it is today, what you said about getting out of your four walls and trying to discover what is out there. It is when we have walled ourselves in the framework of our own thoughts and truths that we convince ourselves that there is no greater truth. This is reality. This is how it should be. And this is how I'm going to make the world. And you have blinded yourself to the possibility that there could be more out there, is where we are today. We're in this world that is so consumed with its own truth and its own perspective with their blinkers on. When you take those blinkers off and you expose yourself to other people's truths, even if you don't agree with them, you expose yourself to them and you say, there are other perspectives out there. There could be a thought that challenges mine. And it is up to me to keep my mind open enough to either to engage in debate and to either take it on, study it, look at it properly, thoroughly, analyze it, and then either accept it or fold it into my own philosophy or completely, discard it. But we hold ourselves so rigid in our thoughts and in our beliefs that the thought and the beliefs of anyone else stand no chance of finding acceptance or even hearing in our lives. And it's when we drop those walls and we say, you know what, there's so many truths. My truth is not the only truth. There's lots of truths that actually make up
the human experience. Well, that is the irony of the technology we live in today, right? The purpose or the philosophy behind technology and social media is that you expand beyond your four walls. It becomes virtual walls that can be deconstructed. But the problem is they've been deconstructed to a certain extent, but they've been reconstructed in such a narrow fashion that today, if you're a 12-year-old middle school girl, you really have a very, very likely very myopic experience in social media. Most likely you're not reading about what's happening in Kazakhstan or in Argentina or India. You're probably likely doing Instagram videos and TikTok videos about makeup I mean, I hate to generalize, but it has shortened, it has made our walls a lot more constricted and made our rooms a lot smaller than what the original intent was.
Oh,
I
because
agree.
we're having this incredible discussion of this man and this woman and these people who went out and tried to discard, you know, their beliefs of sansar, of the world, and to find the truth of suffering and what causes suffering and how do you end it, how do you bring about the end of it, and how do you go down this road to discover the truth of it all. And well, the truth of today is that we live in a world that's so consumed by superficial physicality. And it's not just superficial physicality, it's that they consume. You see, spirituality is about discarding lies and untruths and discovering what, you know, what takes you higher, what makes you better. On a very basic level, what makes you a better person? On the most basic of levels, what makes you a better person, right? However, today with technology and the way we use the technology is to enhance people's perceptions of us. And you judge yourself on how people perceive you. Do they see me as so? Is my cup held right in this Instagram shot?
Well,
My Snapchat this? Is my Facebook that?
well, it's
So,
a very limited series of thoughts, right?
It is.
It's a very limited series of things that you worry about.
It
You
is,
worry
because
about your,
instead of going inward and improving yourself, everything about you is a projection. So it's all outward and trying to control how people see you. So it's tweaking this and a face filter for this, and you know, so it's no longer the truth of who you are. It's simply the truth of what you project. Catfishing everyone, right? Not just with your face, but with everything of you, every aspect of your personality. And the truth about spirituality and being on the path of spirituality, any religion, any non-religion, spirituality does not necessarily have to be linked to a religion, is about discarding all of that. And instead, in today's day and age, we find that everyone's clinging more and more onto it. And it's not just the young people. I see so many people my age and older, you know, on their phones with their filters and, you know, really programming every bit of how they present themselves. And the angle has to be right. And the food, the restaurant I'm sitting in, the snack, you know, the pictures of their food, because, you know, the image of that food is more important than the consumption of it, the taste and the enjoyment of it. The people that you're with in the restaurant don't matter. It's how is that food presented, and then, therefore, how am I presenting it to the world? As though their enjoyment of that picture is more important than your enjoyment of the food itself.
well, there's more money spent on lighting food than lighting people.
Yeah. We were talking about lighting earlier. You saying, oh, your lighting is really great. The sun's gone down. I've lost my natural light.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on lighting. But what we can do is we can use technology for essentially the exchange of ideas, right? Like what we're doing today, I would come back to, we are in a technological revolution where you and I are able to talk about a topic that is what, 2,500 years old across, there's either Pacific Ocean between us or the Atlantic Ocean between us. And we're basically sitting and having adda, as you would call in my Bengali culture, is that this is a true form of global adda, you know. And Dinis, I challenge you, our next set of series should be called Global Adda, ADDA, which is the discussion of quite many irrelevant topics that all sort of come together.
I'm gonna cut it.
I love that.
Actually, hang out. A hangout
Adda
is an adda. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we just started a movement now, Dinis, called the Global Adda. And we're going to talk about women that were kind of ignored, but not really.
No, women that were hard to ignore. So were sidelined, but we're bringing them back.
Yeah.
Center stage.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about a lot of women in this, but we're going to talk about a lot of men too. And we're going to talk a lot about people who don't either identify as men or as women, and that's okay too. It's all going to be.
We don't care. We're just talking about people. Inspiration.
It's an exploration of any living thing that has consciousness.
Yeah, true.
So I wanted to provoke a bit the last and make a bridge between, because you kind of highlighted the negativity of technology, but let's look at the positivity as well. Because one of the things that, well, using one of the quotes of Buddha, that is probably the most famous quote of Buddha, that is, okay, what you think, normally you become. And I think my question for both of you as authors, or at least people that are very wise and try as well a lot of learning, is, okay, in the end of the day, definitely our society is very dysfunctional and is the most advanced society in history of humanity, but it's probably one of the most dysfunctional, and I think it's becoming increasingly more dysfunctional. And of course, this series, Music for, is precisely about music, is about celebrating something, or at least going through emotions, or going through something that is very positive, or even might be very sad, but it's something that you use for that. So how do you look at this, especially? So we look at the technology for like the kind, I would say, the nihilistic part of technology that is making us dumb. And that part always happened in history. Unfortunately, if you look at history, humanity always has a kind of a, I would say, a dumb side that I think I would say, probably using a quote from Stanley Kubrick, is that, and I love that quote, is that humanity can be a virus sometimes, and a virus kind of self-destroys itself, or at least some virus. And in the case of humanity and nature, nature can have a power like a volcano, an earthquake, a sea quake, but at the same time it's beautiful. But when it destroys, it destroys. So and we are part of nature as well. We cannot take ourselves. So how do you see this, especially because the challenge, and I will use a quote from, I use one from Buddha, now I'll use probably one from Reika as well, is that I think, especially in the sense of the next 10 years, and I think especially me and Amrita are working a lot with technology, is that if you look at linear, let's say if I get 30 steps in linear ways, 30 steps, I go 30 steps, I probably go 20 meters, depends on the size of my step. But if I go in an exponential level, I can go 1 billion faster. And this is, I think, the first time in history that we are in a slightly different level, because this is actually opening a lot of doors. And if you come back to humanity that you mentioned, and what makes us humans, and Buddha is someone that actually found a lot of the DNA of being human. That's why millions of people follow him, and follow not him necessarily, but all these teachings and everything that came out of his wisdom. But at the same time, right now, we are creating a new variation of humanity, that is the machines. And the first iteration of the machines is our data. And most of our data just reflects who you are. It's not the data. In the end of the day, the machines are just machines, is the way we use it. So I would like to touch this in a bit provocative as a wrap up, because it's about music for, and it's about Buddha. It's about as well this kind of how we can actually program this world, because we have as well an authority as artists, creators, and technologists. And I would like to have this, and as musician as well.
Dinis, I would argue that the data, once it reaches a certain scale, isn't who we are, right? Because when you have data and data and data in your brain, at some point your brain takes over and says, here's judgment, right? Here's emotion. Here is the proper way of containing the data to where there's not too much information, right? The brain is capable of a lot of information, but it self-contains. Now, if you have technological data, it just goes, the growth of it just goes like this. At what point does the judgment on what's important versus what's noise come in? So in that respect, technological data has a lot of, just is deficient. And it's not compassionate, and it does not have any sort of way of measuring human suffering, which is the only real thing that we have, is the notion of who is suffering and who is not. Data cannot measure human suffering. So if I were in a battle with data, and data was another person, and I was in a Western with a gun, I think I'd win.
Well, I think that's fair. I think that's also a very simplistic way of looking at the relationship between human beings and data. I think we have to, understand that data isn't this simplified
Other person.
set of, binary set of information or whatever, the way data is developing, the way we are collecting data today is changing exponentially every single day. It has already taken a life of its own. And, the way we understand AI, what was it called? Skylab? Terminator?
Yeah.
Right? Skylab's Terminator.
Skynet, yeah.
Well, yeah, probably some time off. But artificial intelligence has a face now, and it has a brain. Certainly, all the data that all these big, massive companies are collating are coming together to put some very relevant information on society as a whole. And it is how we collect this information instead of using it for profit, use it to benefit society. I think what we're seeing so far, and this is why there's such an outcry always about the collection of data, collection of information on people, what you eat, what you like, where you shop, what you buy, is all at the present moment being used purely for materialistic purposes. The next step, hopefully, will be where we use this data to benefit society, to benefit people as a whole. I know that that is what Dinis is working on in a big way, with his ideas of smart cities and everything that he's writing on and working on, collaborating with so many important people all over the world. That in the spirit of optimism, that is where you hope you go. Dinis, I agree with you. What we had spoken about earlier about technology is very negative. It is a truth of technology, of social media as it exists today. I think, and I hope that it's a short-lived wonder where, oh my God, you can take a photograph. And this is certainly when, mobile phones were invented, the excitement, you can carry this thing in your phone, in your pocket and be in touch with anyone whenever you want. And then, oh my God, you can take a photograph and send it instantly, and Blackberries and every single development was always so exciting. I look at my nephew who'll be 13 in 2 days, and he's so blasé about it. The things that got us so excited, it's just fact. It's fact for them because they've grown up with it. They don't know any different. For us and people who've come after us, certainly in the 1 or 2 generations that have come after us, things are still so exciting because, especially in today's world, you see all these developments happen as we speak. Oh, they're making this discovery and this new invention, and the next thing you know, Scotty will be beaming me up. It's like Star Wars. Who knows? You don't know. Anything is possible. But thing is that we live in this world of technological awe. Everything is wonderful. And so, we jump down that rabbit hole and we want to present ourselves and we want to be the first ones to become members of this social media group or, send my first photograph out. I think and I hope that, the awe or the need to be the first in or to participate in will die down as it becomes more and more banal, which, like everything, it will. Every technology that's developed becomes such a marvel. And then, of course, everything becomes banal. I mean, we don't think anything of riding in electric cars today, whereas just about 100 years ago, cars were not that common. They were common, they were becoming common, but 150 years ago, who ever thought of it? So everything with the passage of time becomes banal and ordinary and commonplace. I think when you see the importance that a lot of schools are now giving to the concept of mindfulness, to turning inwards, even with very small children, they sit them down and just close your eyes, think of whatever, breathe, concentrate on your breath. One hopes that becomes more widespread. That simple 5 minutes or 20 minutes, ideally, in a day that you take out, just to turn inwards, just to focus on your breath, or in the most simplistic ways would be to just focus on your breath, turn your concentration inwards.
Suvarna, I can't think of a better reason why we should be talking about Buddha, just for that reason.
Exactly.
He was one of the main guys.
Yes, he was. In fact, when you have spoken about how asceticism was so popular in that day and age, and it was, and Siddhartha Gautam did try his hand at asceticism. He had 2 teachers who each of them taught him the importance of the breath, How do you focus on the breath? Mindfulness. They did teach it. So he did learn from these great teachers, and he found that that was still lacking. It wasn't the truth he was looking for. So he moved on. After that, he became an ascetic. He gave up, he'd live on a grain of rice a day, as severe and rigid as that. And he did that for a few years and found that was lacking. This is not the truth I'm looking for. And so he went from the one extreme of the royal life to the other extreme of the ascetics, very rigid, harsh life of renunciation, and found that neither was the solution, found the middle path.
Yes.
You know, life, very simply, you know, if we just could live lives of moderation in everything, even technology or our consumption thereof, you know. And so he found that neither great pleasure, great luxury, nor great renunciation was the answer. It was the middle path, the middle road that he found was the answer to, well, a better existence for yourself and for others. And so it all comes back to that, doesn't it? We circle back to that, to just having moderation in everything, including a consumption of technology. So,
Yeah. Yeah, see, Dinis, we brought it back together. We brought it back to
No, it's wonderful.
all
No,
his-
and I think it's really wonderful because that's why I think these topics are more relevant than ever. Because so coming back to your point, Amrita, of the data irrelevance and the data absurdity, which is completely correct. But the point is that, to Suvarna's point, is that is the way we manage this data that makes us relevant. And I think the challenge is probably for the next stage of humanity is the machines are already the kind of I would say the continuation of evolution of humanity, and the way you program it, it's all for us. Because let's say if it's someone like both of you programming, or at least if people like us, or at least people listening to us, are engineers or technologists, they will think about this at least a bit. And if they will think about this, they might think, okay, let me program a machine that won't be biased or gender, yeah, all these kind of things that we talk.
I think one of the best advancements in education that could happen is people both learn ethics and coding, right? So if you know, as any layperson, as my 14-year-old son, if he understands what coding can do, but at the same time he's given true early investment in ethics, that's a powerful
compassion.
it's a powerful combination to understand how technology is actually coded and how behavior is coded, but also have an ethical base on it. And ethics, not a religion. I don't mean religious.
No.
I mean from the standpoint of what's good for people, what's good for things of consciousness or not. You know?
Yeah, but you know, this scares me just very slightly, because when you think of what is good for people, and you have a group of people that sit in on judgment for the benefit of mankind, led to the Manhattan Project and the development.
That is true.
So that always worries me a little, to give people or few people the power to decide what is good for all the world. You're coming back, circling back to spirituality and Buddhism, just teaching compassion. As long as you teach compassion, and if the new generations that come in have a compassion so deeply ingrained in them that they feel that every action of theirs has to benefit all living beings, all of the planet, you know, everything that exists, is really the answer to it, right? When you have ethics or morality, then you have judgment.
Well, you deconstruct it again. Okay, ethics and morality, I'm sure there are schools in certain parts of the world that have completely revived it with a non-religious, non-political, non-judgmental way. I would agree with you that most of it is probably not being done in the right way. But if you deconstruct it again to what creates human suffering? What is it to be kind to another living person, right? Just focus on that. Focus on what does the concept of suffering mean? How do people experience it? Do they experience it when they take opioids? Do they experience it when they have a drug overdose? Do they experience it when they are not able to have a baby? We don't really know, but it's like, those are the questions we should be asking ourselves, right? It's like, when do people feel suffering, and what does that even mean to have suffering? And
Well,
I would argue a machine doesn't know that. There's no way a machine would know that.
in Buddhism, see, the very first question you ask, you have the Four Noble Truths of, when you understand life and living. The first noble truth is the truth of suffering. What is the truth of suffering? The truth of suffering is that no happiness is everlasting, is eternal. So even in the moment of being happy, of having great joy, is the realization that this is a fleeting moment, that it is here now, it is gone tomorrow, and how do you get it back? Do we live our lives always trying to recreate those moments of happiness, trying to live constantly in those moments or in that state of happiness? So suffering, therefore, is also longing, need, desire. How do I live forever? I desire that car, that house. If I had that, I would be truly happy. But we never are we. Even if we get our greatest desire, we're never happy, because then you have another desire. I wish I weren't sick. I wish I had better skin. I wish I had better hair. I wish I were, I don't know, 20, 30 kilos lighter. Well, it's just wishes for horses, But here's the truth. This is suffering. We create our own suffering because we're not happy with anything. And that lack of happiness is the truth of suffering. The knowledge that no matter how happy you are, that moment won't last forever. And then you live constantly trying to recreate that, or there will be some pain, there will be disease, there'll be something that somebody else has, and somebody always has more than you do, and you're always desiring more. That's the truth of suffering, and that truth is universal. Everyone has that. Everyone, even a dog on the road will look and say, I want that bone. Why does that dog have? Well, I want that ball. I want you to scratch behind my ear. It's all desire, even for an animal that can't speak, right? So all living beings have suffering. Simply to exist is to have suffering, and that is the truth of life. That is the truth of suffering. That's the first noble truth. So when you ask what is suffering, that is really what suffering is desire.
Yeah.
Desire, pain, being dissatisfied, longing for things that we don't have,
But at the same time, Suvarna, you don't want to get it to the point where it's the concept of suffering is so accepted in your own mind that it's okay to watch people in huts and on the street and homeless. You do want to alleviate that for the other.
So what you're talking about now is philanthropy. And
Yeah.
the truth of it is, who said it? I mean, I read it somewhere or I heard it somewhere. If you took Mont Blanc and you leveled it, because you said all of Europe should be the same height. How dare one mountain be so high? And you leveled Mont Blanc. How much would you raise all of Europe? What, half an inch, a centimeter? Would you? So to say that everyone should be, well, people aren't equal, are they? And again, in Buddhism, is the law of karma, isn't it? So your actions have consequences. Your good actions and your bad actions have consequences. In the West, I think the concept of karma has been bastardized a bit, where karma is this bitch that's going to come and get you. There's no revenge. There's no avenging fury that's going to come and get you and, spank you for your bad behavior. It's really the truth of your good actions will engender good results for you, good fortune for you. And your bad actions will engender misfortune for you. So if you've done something wrong, you will live out a series of events in this life, in a future life, whatever it be, that, should cause you to understand the wrong that you did and correct your actions there. You have to break a cycle. All of life is cyclical, right? So if you've done some good, that comes back to you in a future life. You're born into a good life, into a more fortunate life. You're more beautiful, you're richer, you're more powerful. If you've done wrong, I don't know, if you stole, you're born as a monkey. So this is what is believed. This is, how you, describe what karma is. Good actions lead to good fortune. bad actions lead to misfortune. So it's really, in our control, right? The better person you are in this life or the next, you'll have a better life. So yes, so when you say, oh, that poor man lives in a hut, I don't know, is it very silly of me to say that could, and but the thing is, in the East, in India and all, it is accepted as your lot because, well, my past lives I did something, and so in this life I have this existence, so there is a fatalism associated, it's almost a fatalistic approach where you say my actions brought me to this life.
Well, what you would argue is the Western way of looking at it is people shouldn't be living in huts. People should have a basic roof over their heads and access to clean water. And I think back in that time of history or in certain parts of the world, you would say, well, that is life. Some people live in huts, some people live in a big palace, and that's the nature of things. Versus here, you would say, maybe everybody could live in a nice suburb and some people live in palaces. We don't really know. But I do think
I think there will always be inequality. As long as a society, there will be inequality.
Let me advance this idea. Okay, so say, forgetting aside where you live and how you live and access to clean water, there is one thing I would say that is perhaps a universal idea, which is if you have somebody who's your child or your loved one, you want to be able to do things that aid in their overall health and well-being. Not having access to the technology and the tools to aid in your loved one's well-being, I would argue is a pretty, it's suffering, right? Not having access to sending your kid to school or getting medicine when other people have that is, to me, pretty real and true suffering that we should be able to solve that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Now, what you're talking about here is suffering, of course. Those people is being less fortunate in material terms. I absolutely agree with you that everyone should have access to good healthcare, should have access to clean air, should have access to clean water, and an education. These are absolutely fundamental rights that should exist all across the world. They don't. And should we focus more of our energies in trying to make this happen? We should. Absolutely right. I feel the suffering that we're talking about here is more in the spiritual sense, right?
Yes.
This is physical human suffering that is caused to such a large extent by human greed. There are countries and societies that exist in poverty, or people in society that exist in poverty because, it's
because some people like to accumulate, right? It's been there throughout history. There's just such a strong need to have the accumulation of goods and gold and riches at the expense of people.
There will always be those that amass wealth, great good fortune to them. I think what's sad is that great good fortune has been amassed at the cost of others. So, and you know what, when you see it's so relevant in, especially today when you have people jetting off into space, right? Because it's such an ego boost. But that's really all it is. You've done nothing to advance science.
No.
Imagine okay, great. You know what? You've had these passenger flights into the edge of space and come back. So that's a great advance for science. I guess a 90-year-old man can make it to the edge of space and come back alive. Wonderful. But
think about this for a second.
Yes, that's great that you've done that. But to have done only that and nothing for people, right? And I'm being very specific here without naming names, is to me just abhorrent that you can, be sent off into space as the first passenger into space and have that great golden colossal statue built to your ego. And then at the very same time, do absolutely nothing when a little from you could mean so much to so many.
Yeah.
Is to me appalling. And it would not diminish you or your wealth in any way. to have done just bits,
Yeah.
right? That is,
You know why that happens though, Suvarna? I think the reason that happens, and I'll tell you a story, is because people are not getting out there and seeing things, right? So if you're stuck in your castle and you're not able to go see what's really happening, you get into this self fantasy. You tell yourself stories that, oh, the way to enlightenment is to go up in space and see the world, right? Versus, I will tell you about an experience I had 3 years ago. My grandfather turned 100. I went to India and I took a bicycle rickshaw from Gorihat to Salt Lake. It's a rickshaw I had not taken in many years. I think it's been maybe 15 years. And the technological change is the rickshaws that were previously carried by men and they went on foot are now bicycles. I get off the bicycle rickshaw and I had 100 rupees. I think the rate was 80. And 100 rupees is what? It's $1.30 versus 80 was $1.10. So I gave the rickshaw bicyclist 100 rupees and he looked at it and he said, I don't have change. And I said, keep the change. And he was so amazed in both the happiness and the tears and the sadness in his eyes that he would be there that day with the extra 20 rupees. It really touched me, not only because I saw his emotion, just his raw emotion, but I thought, where have I been all this time? Like, what am I doing? Like, it just takes a small little experience, a tiny little experience between going from Gorihat to Salt Lake, getting in a rickshaw to just bring me back to freaking reality about what is actually happening. What is really happening.
When we talk about disparity of wealth, and I've explained this to some people, where they're like, oh, but, why wouldn't they spend this much? It's not a lot. And I always talk about, you have to understand proportion. So if a man earns $100 and he has to spend 10 of those, that's 10% of his wealth. If a man earns $1,000 and has to spend 10 of those, it's nothing. A man earns $1 million and has to spend 10, that's nothing to him. He wouldn't even think about it. A man who has $1 billion, oh, please come on. I mean, so it's all proportionate, isn't it? So, so just that same amount for you would be nothing, and it wouldn't even be the cost of a coffee, would it? But to this
all
man,
they have to do is get out there. All they have to do is get out there and see actually what's happening. And I guarantee you, if they really saw what's happening, they wouldn't be spending their time in space.
I think that's very naive. These people didn't come from great wealth. They created great wealth. They were ordinary people for a very long time. They've created great wealth halfway through their lives, and now they're amassing greater and greater wealth. So they don't come from, they're not a Siddharth Gautam who grew up in the, within the walls of his father's palace, never had their eyes open to the truth. They had need and suffering growing up. They didn't grow up in the lap of luxury. So,
hold on a second. You can think about it. You don't have to be born Siddharth Gautam. You can become a Siddharth Gautam. You can become a prince. You can become a prince and actually
closing your eyes. That's you willingly blinding yourself, closing your eyes to what is out there, and to say that, do you know, if I can do it, so can you. I did it. There's nothing holding you back. So you know what? There's no excuses for you. I'm going to get out there. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And, good luck to you. You get out there. It's a capitalist society. Everyone has an equal opportunity. You go do what I did. Good luck, good luck, good luck. But you know what? You're not so holding back for a second and saying, hey, hold on. I had great good fortune to get in there first and be the first one in there. And capitalize on the market and get a corner, completely corner the market. And so, hey, here's a handout, here's $100, go do the same. No one's going to do that. No one's going to do that. Everyone's going to say, you know what? Let me get another slice of that cake. Let me get a bigger slice of that cake. till they're hogging the whole cake and there's a few crumbs left for everyone else. They're not going to stop and say, you know what? Here's one slice for you. Here's a sliver of the cake for you. No, they're going to say, the more I have, the safer and secure I am. So there's some deep-rooted insecurity there, right? That says, I need more. So how much is enough? You already have more than anyone in history. And there's a whole host of people out there. I'm not talking about one man. I'm talking about a whole bunch of people that already have more that historically any person, any single one person has ever had. These people have more than entire economies and entire nations, right? They already have more. But it's not enough, is it? But so I say great luck and great fortune to you. You've done well, you've made money, but to do so and create that greater disparity between the haves and the have-nots, it's no longer the haves and have-nots. It's the have-it-alls and have-nothings.
Yes.
So there's just some people who have it all. So you have this floundering, almost despairing middle class. And then you have people who just don't, especially now with the pandemic, with COVID, with everything that's happened, people out of jobs, people with no job security.
And you know, and I'm sure this is the case in London where you are, but particularly in California, what you see is pension fund fueled, technology driven, equity market, like bonanzas. They're not just equity market wealth creation. They're this stock is going up and it's all fueled by this repetitive pension fund. Everybody's believing in this idea that someone's a genius and there's more ad tech, and it is I don't know where this goes, but it doesn't seem to be a train that's stopping anytime soon. It's a train that is accelerating.
We do, the truth is that we do live in a world that, you can't suddenly say, I'm going off. I'm going off to the mountains. I'm going to find my truth. And that's the way it'll be. And everything will be fine. I'll find my truth. I'm going to have a spiritual life. You can't anymore. Even the nuns and monks who follow Buddhist traditions have to have money from somewhere. Whether it's donations or their own family supporting them. The truth is that you need money to survive today. Even if you're going to give up and renounce the world, and you need to have food, you need to have access to healthcare.
You mean you can't live on ramen noodles?
Get anything else? You need to have a mobile phone.
You mean, okay? Well, I think our next topic, Dinis, and I have a series of things that a mental note on things we want to talk about. I want to talk about how little you can live on if you wanted to become an ascetic. And I actually have a friend from business school who wrote a book on the minimum amount of dollars you need to live.
Depends on the country.
Note to self is that's going to be one of the topics that we
again go.
$1 takes you so far in America, and $1 takes you that far in India. So it has to be relevant to the society as well.
Correct.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, there's a lot of stuff here, and I think thank you so much. I think we'll wrap up because we passed 1 hour and a half. So it's a fantastic, inspiring. We went through a lot of stuff. I want just to finish with a quote from Plato. I think we could go through one. Let's go through 2 quotes to wrap up. So one, I think, wraps up what you said before, and because this is about music as well, and music in a very big dimension, is if one should desire to know whether a kingdom is well governed, if its moral are good or bad, the quality of its music will furnish the answer. I think that's a good one to summarize what was said in the last half an hour. And the other one, a bit more positive, is music gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything. So the first one was from Confucius, and the second one is from Plato. So I think 2 as well, very influential people in history. So I think it's been a huge pleasure, and I think this is a wonderful journey of intellectual and as well spirituality discussion, but as well history and ideas, and in this case technology and what makes us humans. It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you so much, and I'm sure you're going to come back, Amrita. We'll come back with the next one. Amrita, I'll leave the last word to you.
Well, like I said, I am glad I decided to get on the plane and try to experience something different, because I would not have met Suvarna, would not have met you. So what I would always encourage my my friends and my loved ones to do is just go consume thoughts. It usually never ends in something bad most of the time. If you want to if somebody says, call me, even if it's uncomfortable, pick up the phone and call them. If somebody says, come visit, just go visit.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Like Buddha did.
Thank you.
Like Buddha did
Yes.
when he left that palace.
Thank you so
Yes.
much for having me, Amrita and Dinis. It was wonderful. I enjoy our conversations off screen as well, and I hope to continue. And Dinis, see you soon. And Amrita, see you very soon
My
here
friend.
on our shores again.
See you later, my friend.
Yeah, we'll
See you
do.
later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.